Hello, I'm back. This is the official part 2. I had to take a step back and decided that I was going to kind of change the route I was going to go into it, and then also kind of speak a little bit on some feedback that I've received. And I have received very, very positive feedback. I have received apologies. I have received negative feedback. I have received threats. I have received many things. And I understood that was going to happen. I did. I really did understand that was going to happen. I guess when I went about going to start this, I had decided I was going to film one video, and I was going to put it all into this one video, release it, and be done. And then as I worked very closely with my eldest daughter and my best friend, it became apparent that for my own mental health and for the due diligence of the story and the reason why I'm putting it out now is important. And taking those steps back and figuring out, am I approaching it the way I want to? Am I sending the message I want to send? So I do go into depth in part 4 of the video. Oh, hold on. We have a spicy kitty in the house right now. Crookshanks. So what I do want to touch on in this opening is I do want to go ahead and explain my reason behind releasing this now, and the reason behind why I'm not holding back, and why I'm sharing the experiences that I am sharing, and the feeling where they come from. I do need people to understand that I have been in and out, sometimes for months-long stays in intensive inpatient and outpatient therapy. I have worked very closely with psychiatrists, counselors, many nurses and doctors who have stood beside me and broke down with me systematically, story by story, everything that went on. After the incident with Tasha and Mark, I decided that I was going to go ahead and use their names. After some counsel with legal and also some counsel with people who have been reaching out to me, I have decided that I am going to say the first names. I did not openly call out anybody's last name, where we grew up, the name of our church, our location, my location, any of that, and therefore I am actually okay to continue using names. And the reason why I have decided to go ahead and use the names is because I think people need to understand that this isn't coming from a place of bitterness and resentment. And I knew that putting it out there, it was going to be considered that. And in some ways I understand, and no one will believe me that it's not, and that is okay. I am beyond aware that many people will tell me I'm lying, and I am beyond aware that many people will not accept what I have to say with an open mind and understanding. I'm also aware that the fact that I am no longer a Christian puts people off. I do go into the reasoning behind that in this part, as well as in parts 3 or 4. So I appreciate every interaction with this and every amount of feedback. I am okay with that. Sometimes it hurts, and that's okay. It's okay to not be okay. It was the very first thing one of my favorite counselors reminded me every morning for a month and a half, that it was okay to not be okay, and I'm okay with that. So again, I go into depth in this in part 4. I definitely ask that if you have started this journey with me, that you will continue it, so that you can continue to see where this road takes me. This part is closing out and finalizing my home life, and parts 3 and 4 will be parts 3 will be going into my young adult life, and part 4 will be going into my last 10 years. So, a lot of people may know this, a lot of people may not know this, but Cody lived in my home for about a year and a half after I had found out that he had gotten kicked out of Job Corps and Serena had taken him to a homeless shelter and dropped him off. I did go through many, many trials with that boy, and it broke my heart every day. Cody is a very broken, very hurt boy, and hurt boys hurt people. And unfortunately, through Cody's story, there is a lot of allegations of abuse, and they are terrible, and they are not right. However, I will not be telling those stories. They are not mine to tell. They are mine to hear, and they are mine to take accountability for, because I knew abuse was still happening in my home, and I knew that it was bad. But I had a baby to raise, and I had mental health to get through, and so I turned away when I shouldn't have, and I stayed silent when I shouldn't have. Today, Cody is in a very troubling situation. Again, I will not go into details about that. And the next generation after Cody has a chance to end up in the care of someone in my family. I can't stay silent anymore. It is my silence that broke Cody. And it is my silence that will continue to break generations in my bloodline if I do not speak up. I do not ask you to believe me. I do not ask you to do any of that. I am sharing my story so that those who can believe me will. And I am sharing my story because my generation and my generations deserve to be free from the cycle of abuse that was placed upon us by one family. And with that being said, again, so my headphones and mic just died, and that's okay. I will go ahead and try to speak as loudly as I can, which is ironic because I am a very, very quiet speaker. So I apologize. I will try to articulate as loudly as I can. So with that being said, I am going to go ahead and again be reading from a script that was carefully put together, and I just hope that you will listen with an open mind and an open heart to understand that this is me taking accountability for the fact that I myself allowed abuse to continue in that home. I did. Me, who is trying to break every cycle that I possibly can in this world, failed Cody, and I will not do that again. Moving into my teenage years was a really weird, unique, and explosive time for me. During this era, as I began to internalize that I was being abused, I felt trapped because I believed no one would save me. Bert and Ginger had convinced me that they were my saviors, and I owed them eternal gratitude, while other adults in the church viewed me and my siblings as unruly, naughty children that needed extreme discipline. This isolation led to a very deep desperation and a lot of self-exiting attempts and ideation. And it also led to some very strange instances of acting out that made no sense to anybody around me, but in my heart it made sense. Again, I was dealing with a lot of emotions. I was moving into my teenage years. I was a wreck. I was a mess in my head. I will not lie. One of the things that I would do I would chase the school bus down the road, and I would do it every afternoon if I could, because for just a moment I would imagine myself being in there and with other kids and experience a life that was different from what I was experiencing. The physical, mental, and emotional abuse that I suffered became deeply intertwined with my religious control. I was often painted as an inappropriate and I don't know how to put this. I was painted as a very inappropriate girl, and I was told that I could no longer speak to boys for more than 5 minutes. And my parents were not framing these rules as rules to protect me. Instead, it was implied that it was my fault if men and boys were lusting after me, attracted to me in any way. It was my fault. I was causing them to stumble. And this next part that I am about to speak about is also me taking some accountability, because in a world of my life, when I began to pull myself back and protect myself and everything, it manifested in ways that I am not proud of. This environment of punishment often extended to the loss of my passions. One day, when a lady in the church offered to let me work with her horses, something I was obsessed with growing up, the opportunity was taken away from me as a punishment for being naughty. It felt like a direct message. I was not good enough for them to want me to have these experiences. I wanted to play the piano, and Ginger said if I learned how to play the piano by myself, she would get me lessons. This culminated in a time where I went through 3 piano teachers, and a lot of it was because I would go and do my lessons, and then I would go home to practice, and Ginger would yell at me because I wasn't doing it right, or I missed a key, or it didn't sound pretty enough, or it was too loud, or there was so many reasons. And as she would collectively yell at me while I was practicing, I would mess up more and more, and then she would eventually tell me to quit because I was not focusing on my studies. Again, I wasn't good enough for these experiences, so I would give up on my things very easily. My father built me a balance beam. I gave up on gymnastics. It's a whole thing. Frequent physical discipline did happen in my family in the ways that I spoke of. And it happened into my adulthood. I received my last spanking when I was 18. I do go into depth on that a little more later. During my high school years at a homeschool co-op is where I broke. And I completely broke. During my years at a homeschool co-op, I befriended a boy and his younger brother. I was told I had to stop talking to boys, and I honestly, I had no crushes on these 2 boys. I was merely friends with them, and we had a lot in common to talk about. So when I was told to stop talking to the boys, I began to ignore and act mean towards the younger brother because he and I had been friends, and he wanted to stay friends. I wanted to save myself from being spanked. So I ignored him. I was rude to him. Later on, that boy self-exited this world. I will never forgive myself for choosing to save my own life over being kind to him. This event shattered my self-worth and caused me to stop believing in God, reasoning that if God truly existed, this scenario could have never happened. In response to the ongoing abuse, I entered a rebellious phase fueled by a very bad attitude. I was done being abused, and that was the only way I knew how to fight back. So I do 1000% agree that I was a rebellious child in every way it imaginable in that home, like fighting back with a bad attitude. I mean, teenagers, and so, but I was not always a good girl. I was a brat. I was a big brat. I was just done with being abused, and that was the only way I knew how to fight back. My access to information was strictly limited to specific Christian materials, but I began to find small ways to reach for freedom, and here is where I owe an apology to one of my friend's mothers, because one day I discovered how to use a rotary phone. And we were watching a family movie, and I discovered I could sneak off to the bathroom and call my friend, and it was a new freedom for me. And so with great excitement, I was doing it far more than I should have ever been doing, and I recognize that now. And she called my mother and informed my mother that I was doing this, and I got in a world of trouble and spankings. So to that friend, I apologize. That is very definitely not fun when you are trying to nap and your daughter keeps getting a call from a crazy child in another house. So a few other ways that I rebelled would be in these manners, and this kind of goes into some of that not believing what I believe anymore, or what I believed then. I discovered a very thin book one day that was in a box of books as I was putting them on the bookshelves. Now, Ginger was a very strict person about reading materials, as I stated, and she would go through these boxes and make sure that she had taken out any of the material that she deemed inappropriate. However, she had missed a very thin brown Greek mythology book, and I began to read this book and realized that other cultures had stories similar to the Bible, and some of them similar in ways, like there's a flood myth, and that led me to go, well, is there more out there? What is out there? I don't know. I only know what I've grown up with, and what I've grown up with. I don't want to mess with that no more. I'm sorry. I apologize. So I did end up taking this book to Ginger, and I did show it to her and question her, like, why do they have similar stories? There was an explanation given. The book was taken away and thrown in the trash. I retrieved it from the trash and hid it under my bed for many, many months to read over and over and over and over and over again, because my mind needed to know. I needed to know more. I was a curious child, and the God I was being experienced to made little sense in my head. I also smuggled things like Newsboys CDs. Sorry for a moment there. I had a stampede, and so I'm back now. I smuggled Newsboys CDs into the house and listened to them on a Walkman with one ear out in the open, waiting and terrified that my parents would burst in and tear me from my bed. And the reasoning behind that is we weren't safe even asleep. Sometimes Ginger and Bert would walk through the house, and if we were sleeping in ways they deemed inappropriate, they would yank us from our beds and spank us. So you weren't safe if you were sleeping. You just weren't. Yeah. Sorry again. My 15-year-old has a presentation due tomorrow, and he's very anxious about it. So I was helping him make cookies, because baking is how he handles his anxiety. I did eventually give those Newsboys CDs over to my brother-in-law, because I just was terrified of losing them, and they had been given to me by a good friend. At the age of 16, I went on a mission trip. During this trip, I learned that I was a little more Hispanic than my parents had led me to believe, which was an interesting concept to learn. And I met a boy named Santos, and we shared my first kiss. on the night that we were leaving to go back home. We were caught by a church elder who labeled me as extremely inappropriate, and for the place I was, the time I was, the home I was in, and the religion that was being followed, I was inappropriate. For my own personal beliefs and the way that I've raised my family and my children, I don't see an issue with it. So whether you agree with it or not, I don't fault you for either one. I am very respectful of belief systems, religious customs, all of that. I may not follow the Christian path, but my daughter does. And we have many, many wonderful conversations, and I love her dearly, and she is a brave and powerful and wonderful woman. And I have nothing but absolute respect for her and who she is. Okay. I would like to insert a trigger warning before this next part. This next part contains a story about SA. And I want to be very clear that it is a traumatizing story. And so if you would like to skip ahead, I would recommend skipping ahead about, let me see, probably about 2 minutes. Later, while cleaning the church nursery, which is something we often did, we were in charge of the nursery, church camp out, VBS, New Year's Eve party. We were heavily involved in the church. A man from the congregation came to me while I was cleaning in the church nursery and began making inappropriate essay advances, and asking to touch me inappropriately in very many spots. I was terrified, but eventually I told first my sister, some of our friends who worked really hard that day in the church to be with me wherever I was going to go to make sure he could not reach me. I spoke privately to Mark and Tasha about it, and Mark and Tasha went with me to speak to Bert and Ginger. And for a brief moment, my parents were unsure, and the elders of the church went with my dad to confront the guy, and he confessed to it. And I do recall vaguely, I want to make this very clear. This is best of a recollection of this time that I can remember, because I internalized a lot of it, and I am not willing to unpack that box in therapy yet, and so I don't feel like if I'm not ready to unpack that whole box in therapy, I'm definitely not ready to unbox it in front of people who may or may not have my best interests at heart. They supported me, and it was wonderful, and it was wonderful to see that my dad and my mom were in support and protecting me, and it did become a legal matter. However, I did begin to think maybe I had misinterpreted my entire life, and maybe I needed to rethink my view of them, and maybe they were right. Maybe I was a fundamentally flawed child, and then that hope was extremely short-lived. 6 months later, my parents found out about the kiss in Mexico. My mother, Ginger, called me into the room. She told me she now understood why I had been essayed in the church. She said it was my fault, and I was a slut, and had proven it on the mission trip. And that is the end of that. As I approached my 18th birthday, I did become smitten with a young man. I'm so sorry. You know who you are. I was weird. It's okay. I get it. He was working on our neighbor's house, and in my mind, he wasn't just a crush. He was a potential ticket out of home. So I did confess to him my feelings, and he told me that, you know, he had other plans in his life. Perfectly okay, perfectly acceptable. However, he did call my parents, and uh, panicking, I called a friend to come pick me up and drive me to town because I was done. I was over. I was 18 and this was getting ridiculous. That is when my brother-in-law Mark and my sister Tasha intercepted me and used emotional manipulation to convince me to return, telling me that leaving would prove I did not love my young nephew, whom I adored explicitly. They promised I could stay with them until things were resolved with my parents. I trusted them, but as soon as I walked through their door, they informed me that Bert and Ginger were already on their way to get me. It was a very devastating lesson in learning that no one in my family was trustworthy. After that failed attempt, I was watched closely. Eventually, my parents caved and allowed me to take classes at SCC to become a nurse. Now, that was a whole fight in and of itself. Again, I will touch briefly on it, but I feel like I'm done due justice for people to understand that this abuse is happening, and so I'm going to try to condense down just the rest of this story to go ahead and get that out here, and then I can move on. So, I was able to take these classes at SCC, but again, Ginger maintained total control by choosing my classes for me. She also let me know I wasn't supposed to go into any study groups or anything like that. While in college, I thought about making a second attempt to leave kind of right towards the beginning, I believe is when it was. Now, I could be wrong. It could have been a little bit before college, but this whole time is very, very quick and rapid fire in my brain because I was ready to get out of there. I was done. I made what I did not think was the mistake of telling Serena that I had plans to leave again. And she immediately tattletaled to Ginger, which, y'all, we loved each other so much, but sometimes we could be so mean to each other. So what transpired after that was probably the most terrifying experience of my entire life. My parents yelled and screamed that they could see the devil in my eyes and began to pray the devil out of me while my sister sobbed in the living room begging for God to remove Satan from my heart and this home. Trapped and overwhelmed, I used the only survival skill I had. I lied. I burst into tears and I apologized, claiming the devil had his hold on me and I wanted it to stop and this, that, and the other, and it was ended. Please, if you have ever experienced something like this in your life, I am so sorry. It was utter terrifying. The very next day, I immediately sought out a counselor at the school and admitted to being abused and shared my story with her. The school took it very seriously, and over several sessions, we mapped out a safety plan, coordinated with classmates and a study group that I joined for a place to stay, and began smuggling extra clothes to the school counselor who could distribute them to the students that were assisting me. I would wear multiple layers or hide outfits in my backpack, and Ginger never noticed. I once nearly got caught when I left the house in a skirt and a hoodie and returned in a t-shirt and pants, but I managed to talk my way out of it. And so my plan was to leave a letter on my bed and never return, but a sudden change in the schedule forced my hand. Ginger usually wasn't the one taking me to school, but the next morning she had decided she was going to. But that night, both Ginger and Bert would be out of the house. And because of that, Patches, come here. Hold on one second. I know, but you're trying to come up in my lap. Here you go. The plan was to leave that letter on my bed, like I said, but I realized Ginger and Bert would be out of the home. Honey bunches of oats and toast. What is going on, dear? Do you want to say hello? Can you say hello? Okay. Can I let you down? Are you just going to sit here? Okay. And so I saw that I had a window of opportunity that I may never have again. And because of that, I decided to call a very special friend of mine from my HomeLink program. I will not out who she is, but I want you to know that she is my absolute hero. This woman was a send to me from the universe, and I love her forever. And so to you, if you see this, thank you. While my sister Kitty was in charge, I managed to slip out and move a lot of my belongings to the garden. I took a lot of stuff, and I left a lot of stuff. Things, I was a little bit of a pack rat. By a little bit, I mean I was a lot of bit of a pack rat. She pulled up on the road, threw open her trunk, while I threw my bags over the fence, and dropped stuff all over the ditch and the road, and didn't care because we were moving so fast because we were terrified my mother was going to appear out of the ether. And we took off up the road as fast as we could. Leaving felt fundamentally wrong, only because I had been raised to believe I had no rights. My siblings and I were denied the basic necessities of human existence: peace, peaceful sleep, a bed to lay our heads. I am speaking out now to share the reality of my childhood, and in the next two parts, the process of deconstructing from that religious trauma. I am fully aware of the retaliation efforts being made against me, and I do understand them. I was already prepared, and I was already prepared to not be believed. I am not doing this for myself. I am not doing this to destroy my family. I am doing this because I didn't save Cody. And for that, even I am unforgivable.